All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tim Von Stetten, Senior Assistant Director for Regional Engagement and Professional Networks Initiatives here at William & Mary. And I'm excited to welcome you to today's webinar, How to Get the Family Stories That Change Your Life with Shanda Cooper and Brad Brewer. And before we begin, I would just like to note a few additional upcoming events that we have coming up here with the Alumni Association. So first of all, on June 17th, we'll have a conversation with William & Mary faculty regarding how women's biology and immune function is impacted by diseases, including COVID-19. And again, that's next Wednesday from 4 to 5:30. Our alumni admissions weekend has gone virtual this year, taking place on the 19th. And this program is designed for alumni families and students entering their junior and senior year of high school. And whether or not your student is looking at William & Mary as their school, Alumni Admissions Weekend is a great opportunity to learn more about the process from an insider's perspective. And then finally, William & Mary is offering 2 other forums for alumni to come together for an unstructured conversation focused on healing, building community, and sharing best practices to end racial and social injustice. And you'll see there are 2 timeframes here to accommodate various schedules, and that's on June 24th, either at noon or at 7 p.m. And I would also like to do a quick plug for William & Mary Switchboard. And that's an online platform where those in the alumni community can connect with one another easily and directly. And we often describe this kind of as a fusion between LinkedIn and Craigslist, but it's exclusively for William & Mary alumni. And today's conversation will be recorded, and we'll be notifying you when the recording is available. Questions are encouraged, and Brad and Shanda will answer as many questions as we can with the time given. If you roll to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A icon appear, and that's the best way for you to submit those questions, and we'll take those and then present them to Brad and Shanda throughout the presentation. And a little bit about our panelists. Brad is the Vice President of Legacy Kept, a social enterprise dedicated to preserving family stories and bridging the generation gap. In this role, he builds partnerships with senior care organizations and delivers related educational content through a variety of channels. Brad formerly served as the director of the Center for Community Engagement at Christopher Newport University here in Virginia, and was a national fellow at the Corella and Bertram F. Bonner Foundation. He holds a bachelor's degree in communication studies and leadership from Christopher Newport and an MBA from William & Mary. Shanda is passionate about sharing her gifts of compassion and problem solving to create opportunities for others to access resources that will equip them to achieve their goals. Through her work as an international development consultant, she helps to activate clients at the intersection of global development, social impact, and reform to implement lasting change in their organizations and communities. Enthusiastic about history and storytelling, Shanda records oral experiences as a medium of preservation and unification. And with that, we are truly delighted to have both Brad and Shanda join us today. And with that, I will stop my screen share here and pass it over to them.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Tim, and for all of you who are joining us right now. Shanda and I are really excited to bring this conversation to you, and we've been just enjoying conversations with each other. We actually met on the switchboard when I was sort of sharing this idea, and we realized we had a very similar passion for family stories and the ways that they impact our lives. And so this was actually her idea. Thank you, Shanda, for for saying, we need to bring this to the tribe and bring this to the network. So great to be with you.
Likewise, Brad.
Yeah. So we are honored to serve as your guides through this session and this conversation. We're really hoping that it is relevant to you. We feel this is a really timely conversation to be having as it relates to intergenerational relationships with family, especially right now. And so we'll cover some of those things, but we're just thrilled to serve in this way. So we have a few learning objectives that we want to make sure that we cover. The first is that we really address why knowledge of family and friendship roots are essential to our growth. My wife is a marriage and family therapist, and she talks about family of origin all the time and how it so directly impacts who we are and who we become, the environments in which we were raised, and and the relationships that are so formative in our lives. So that's one thing that we want to make sure we impress upon everyone that I'm sure you can relate to. We want to cover some really practical things like how to ask your parents and grandparents and friends for their story. So the knowledge of family roots, there are lots of different ways that people go about trying to get those. Obviously, a multi-billion-dollar industry around your family tree, your lineage, your great 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 grandparents and where they lived, and that's all really really important. But if you've got living relatives, older parents, older grandparents, you could have access to a lot more context and a lot more important information that would really help your life. So we want to help you know how to do that. And then we'll talk and have you all actually tell us what would be beneficial about having some written account of a loved one. Why would that matter in your life? How would that be helpful to them to go through a writing reflection process? And then what about future readers? What about your grandkids and your great grandkids having access to that? So we'll talk through some of those things as well. So here's the brief plan for our session. We'd love to just share a little bit of our own story and why this matters to us. We're going to then ask you a couple of questions that you'll be able to answer on the chat so that we can get hear from you and your story. We'll talk about really not only from a familial standpoint but from a societal standpoint, how do we bridge the generation gap? It's clearly a challenge and there's a ton of opportunity that we have right now to address this. And then we'll give some again, practical ways that you might want to take some steps and get started doing a project like this with your family. And so we'll tell you how to do that. All right.
All righty. Thank you, Brad. And thank you, Tim. Hi, everyone. Again, welcome and thank you for joining us today. As previously mentioned by Tim, my name is Shanda Cooper and an alumna of William & Mary, where I majored in international relations and minored in history. So you're probably wondering what my background has to do with storytelling. Well, that is the beauty of storytelling. Anyone can share a story and we all have stories to share. Our lives are worth capturing for future generations. Similar to understanding root causes of conflict, where one has to study the history, the same goes for each one of us. We are in control of our narratives, and it helps to understand, where possible, where that narrative began and how it shaped our current beliefs, purpose, actions, and profession. So being an international development consultant is a part of my identity. In true liberal arts fashion, and because we're all multi-hyphenate, I am also passionate about family history, oral history to be exact. A few years ago, I started recording audio memoirs of older relatives and colleagues as a means of preservation and human unification. So today I'd like to share briefly about my identity through my last name, Cooper, and its impact on my story. I'm starting in 1829. Why 1829? Well, 1829 was the year 3 of my free-born ancestors from Norfolk County, Virginia, boarded the ship Harriet to an unknown yet familiar continent in search of freedom and equality. They left for Liberia on the western coast of Africa, a land purchased by the US Congress for free-born and freed slaves to relocate in order to prevent an uprising. 5 generations ago, my paternal grandfather and his brothers sought liberty and risked their lives to provide this freedom for future generations, for me. 30 years ago, civil unrest uprooted my family. Once again, we returned to Virginia, unaware at the time that this was the home of our ancestors over 100 years earlier. I've been reflecting a lot over the past weeks on the journey of my ancestors across the Atlantic Ocean in search of freedom, and my family's journey back across the Atlantic in search of safety, and the present moment. The present moment can change the narrative for my future generations. What role will I play? Stay in Virginia and work towards the equality my ancestors sought in leaving? This is the power of intergenerational storytelling, and it starts with each one of us. Narrative identity is formed when individuals form an identity by integrating their life experiences into an internalized, evolving story of self. that provides the individual with a sense of unity and purpose. Now I'm going to hand it off back to Brad to share a little bit about his story.
Thanks, Shanda. That's
Yeah.
so powerful, and really appreciate um, knowing that. And yeah, so here I am. I'm the one in the photo that's spraying my grandfather with a hose, and um, I met my grandfather when I was 6 months old, and had just arrived in the United States after my Army officer dad had been transferred from Germany, where I was born, over to Texas, where he was going to teach. But the first stop we made in the United States was right here in Melbourne, Florida, where I now live, so that I could meet my grandfather, my dad's dad. And this photo pretty well sums up the nature of our relationship. And I think if you've got grandkids, or if you've got little ones, and your parents have the relationship, it can be such a fun bond. But beyond fun, it can be such a formative bond. And that's what happened for me. My grandfather was my hero. He was a World War II fighter pilot, and by the time I came around, he had retired and was, just jovial and excited about life, excited to know me, his grandson. And so for the next several years of my life, uh, this place was home base. I think for military kids, you travel around a lot, and when people say, "Where are you from?" you say, "My dad's in the Army, so I'm not from anywhere." But eventually I learned, in fact, just a couple of years ago, that I want to claim this place where I now live with my wife as home. Maybe I'm from Florida, maybe I'm from Melbourne, and this is where I came to visit my grandfather my whole life. He actually wrote a book about his life and about our family, that he published just for the kids and the grandkids, so that we would know him, and so we would know his stories of, growing up in the Great Depression, and fighting in World War II, and how he met my grandmother. And he made copies of that book that, when I got married, I read again, and I shared with my wife. And that's really what charged us up to leave Virginia, where I had lived for 20 years, and say, let's do it. Let's go and see what happens if you tie back into your family roots. And so that's what we did. And I'm also really proud to share that we're expecting our first child in November. Yeah, late November, Thanksgiving Day to be exact. And so that's pretty appropriate. And it's a son, and so it's a boy, and so it's really special to me, to be able to continue in this lineage, and try to think about, like Shanda said, what kind of a world, what kind of an environment am I helping to create for this little one to grow into? And I hope that it's one that is equitable, and that is just, and is right, and is healthy. And so, what kind of a legacy question? What kind of a legacy will I leave? So I've actually left my job a few months ago to help start this organization called Legacy Kept, that you'll hear just a little bit about at the end. My wife and her dad started this, to help make it easy for people to capture their own stories, similarly to the way that my grandfather did. And so that's what I'm doing now. We're on a social mission to help people preserve their family stories, and make sure that each generation has access to that family knowledge. So excited to be able to share with you.
Wow, that's really powerful. And thank you, Brad, for sharing that. I see some congratulations in the chat for your news about your first bundle of joy. So congratulations to you and your wife. So now we'd like to sort of turn the focus on to you, the participants. We'd like to hear a little bit about your story. And if you can answer in the chat the first question: in what ways has knowledge or lack thereof of your family history and stories impacted you? So we're just going to give you, a few minutes to think about that, and feel free to write that in the chat, and we'll share those.
Are any of them coming in?
Let's see. I don't see any right now, but that doesn't mean that they aren't coming. So we'll Oh, there we go. We have one. Oh, they're coming in now. So one of them is from Ivana Marshall, and she says, "It makes me wonder what my lineage looks like. My mom's adopted, and my dad is from the Bahamas. But before that, we don't know where my family is from." Yeah, that's sort of the starting point. Really, that was what happened with with my family, and not knowing when we came to Virginia that we were from here until my father started researching where are we from and trying to trace it back. So that's a great starting point. Um, Another person says, "I've always known that there were slaves that lived, worked on the land that my family still owns in Virginia, but suppressed it out of shame and being overwhelmed." Yeah, awareness is so important. And, it's really understanding, right? And what that means or what it could have meant, like what that meant then and what it means now, and really understanding, how it's shaped your life in some way. Um, yeah, but just, totally just take it in stride and see what you can learn from that experience. I don't know if that's one of the other comments. And Brad, feel free to chime in on any of these as well. Another person says, "I felt more connected to my father's side of the family than my mother's side because we don't know as much about my mother's family." That's interesting. That's really interesting. And it shows, what the impact that might have on your life and, your relationships as well. And that could be a starting point, is learning more about your mother's side of the family. Um, Scottish heritage and lots of family stories, but some of them are lost. Yeah. Um, Knowing my family faced persecution coming from Germany around World War I makes me more accepting of immigrants.
Mm.
That's the power of the story. Yeah, that's it right there. Rachel. Linda says, "Lack thereof has impacted me. I'm interested in my grandparents as they were gone before I was born. I would love to learn more about them." Yeah, same thing. My grandfather's passed away before I was born, and it's powerful to learn their stories and sort of see where there are any connections. Um, Someone else also said that they felt the lack of addressing the issue has contributed to their family dynamic and the person they are today. So there's a lot of awareness happening right now, and with the participants, which is really good. That is part of the reason why we did this, is to take a step to reflect, really. Um, my mother and I both lost our fathers at the same age. Wow.
Mm.
I didn't know this for many years. We were working on family heritage albums when I discovered this, and it gave us such a special bond and helped me to realize just how much she knows what I went through when I lost my dad as a senior in high school. Wow. Yeah, and it was over that moment of creating those family albums. And this is the same, sort of what we're discussing right now, that you unearth all these truths that you had no idea about in your family. Kristen, my father grew up in an orphanage, so I don't know much about his family. And that within itself, like, trying to figure out more about the orphanage or what that impact might have, where he grew up, even the orphanage, and how that might have shaped him, even if you don't know a lot about his family, that might be a starting point. Um, uh, we can't see the chat. Not sure if you want. Okay. Just note that because people are not choosing. Okay. Thank you for that, Lee. Okay, some other options. My ancestors in Virginia arrived in 1619. Wow. I graduated from William and Mary in 1956 with a major in history. My family history has always been important to me. 1619 is a really pivotal year. And as a lot of you know, or I don't know if you do know, that, of course, last year was the 400 years of when the first enslaved Africans set foot in Virginia. And there are a lot of activities surrounding that. So I'm sure this person, has a lot to share. My dad is a big part of my identity. Fighter pilot from a poor background, loud and proud, but sensitive as I think of all his stories and wish I could capture them. Learning my parents' family dynamics, childhood and young adulthood helped me understand their core values, views, perspectives in life, as well as habits and tendencies.
Yeah.
That is great. Thank you for these comments, everyone. They're so appreciated. And thank you for opening up and sharing that.
Yeah. It's like,
So, yeah.
well, from whether, it's a position of wishing you had more information or realizing the impact of the information you do have, we can certainly kind of forget about the things that are actually shaping us. And so sometimes it is helpful to hit pause and ask that question of how have I been impacted, and do I like what I'm finding out, and and what power do I have to maybe change things going forward, or even change things in current relationships now, if I want to change things, or voice appreciation. So that's kind of what we want to talk about next, and so we'll have you all chat in with this as well. We may not read all of them just in the interest of time, but certainly maybe pick some highlights. So yeah, here's this next question.
Yeah. What benefits could you imagine resulting from participating in a life review project with a family member or mentor?
Yeah, so thinking, some of you are actual caretakers right now, whether it's for a spouse or a partner or a parent, or you've got a loved one who's in a maybe assisted living situation, or a memory care situation. So think on that for a minute. Or maybe you're in a position where you might be the one that should write your story and share it with your grandkids, or your children. So what benefits could you imagine? Let's see if we can get some folks typing in here.
So yeah, I'm receiving some of the comments that we're hearing that it'll bring someone closer to their family, but also to the land and community where their family home has been since the 18th century.
Wow.
Another person about family health history and the role that can play in future generations. Bridging the generational gap that can sometimes be awkward to navigate, certainly. Passing family history to grandkids and beyond. And to your point, I think, Brad, to your earlier point, someone also said about getting to hear stories that would otherwise be lost, and helping to understand oneself better, and helpful to others to share their stories too. So those are some of the feedback questions that we received. I mean, answers.
Yeah.
Lots of benefits. Yeah.
Appreciating sacrifices. Yeah. So we'll talk next about just maybe ways to start thinking about bridging any of those gaps in your own family, or in our own communities, but these are all so good. We've also done some research and are learning that there are really health benefits associated for writers to do reflective writing, or reflective life review projects, and those are, whether it's cognitive well-being and psychological, emotional well-being, things that you can learn about your own resilience, or your own strength, things you've overcome, even making meaning of stories that you've lived through. So that's definitely helpful. All right. So, this is great. Anyone recognize that photo in the background?
Does it look familiar, anyone? Haha, creme dal, yeah.
Oh yeah, gold star. So for bridge building, when we think about the generation gap, how we can bridge that. Well, was there something that you wanted to throw in on the why you chose the creme dal?
Oh, yeah, sure. So the reason for selecting the creme dal, which I'm sure, those of you who attended William and Mary or are familiar with Williamsburg know the rumor that the legend, the myth that if you cross the creme dal with a lover, a loved one, and you kiss at the top, the crest of the bridge, that you'll be with that person forever. And so I thought it was fitting, as we sort of cross this bridge building of sorts, that hopefully through this journey of learning about how to capture intergenerational stories, that you can bridge that gap as well, and be able to have those relationships change forever. So that was the reason for choosing the creme dal, and also it's near and dear to a lot of our hearts. So
Yeah.
yes.
Well, thanks. That's such a good symbol. And then when we talk about so casting a vision for your relationships, what do we mean by that? When I think about my own parents, so I just turned 40 a couple weeks ago. It's like one of those big numbers where you're like, whoa, I've been scared of that number for a long time. But I'm still here. And I think about my relationship with my parents who are 71, 68 respectively. Uh, I think about what I want those relationships to feel like and to be like. Do we have good, healthy conversations? Do we enjoy being together? Or is it always stressful and tense? Are we, there's a dynamic in parents and children that, for a long time, the parents are training up and teaching the children how to live. And then seems to be a point in time where that gets reversed and the kids think they're the ones that should teach the parents a thing or two. And so we end up with this tension and these gaps in our experience. But if what would it look like if we actually came together and were able to experience really life-giving conversations and really healing or supportive conversations, healthy conversations? So we just think that's a great starting point, is to just envision that, just get that image, because once you can imagine it, then you can start taking some steps to do that. Overcoming objections is really related to the idea of telling your family that you want to know their story. So maybe you have a parent or a grandparent and you say, hey, listen, here's this vision I have for our relationship. I want us to really be able to understand each other, and I want to know your story. And so the reason we say stories is because, like I mentioned, when you're trying to teach each other or say, hey, this is why you're wrong, or this is why you're wrong, then it doesn't really help with those conversations. But through storytelling, it just kind of opens up this new dynamic. When I hear about my father, graduating in 1968 from high school and having his options for a career extremely, narrowed down to, is it Vietnam as a draftee, or is it university and ROTC? And so, wow, that kind of helped me to understand how tough that must have been for him. And when I've been really tough on him for certain things, it gives me a compassion. So when you say, I want to know your story, you might get some pushback, and here's why. Some older adults feel like maybe they haven't lived a book-worthy life. You think about an autobiography, and typically that's from a public figure who, or some celebrity or politician, and like, why would you need to know my story? And so you might hear that. There might be some insecurity, or there might be some authentic humility, like of just, I've lived my best and I don't need to, talk about it. But one way to overcome that objection is to actually ask them to tell you, because you need their story and your kids need their story. And there are things that they've learned through life, that you've learned through life, that are so important, that are missing from our education. And that old, beat up cliche, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. How many of the social ills in our country have been perpetuated because of a lack of sharing stories and lessons that have been learned from generation to generation? So you'll hear some of that. You might hear, like, if you're asking them to write their story or you want to help them write it, that, well, I'm not a writer. I don't do that. But there are so many tools and platforms. We'll share just one with you today for making it like a project, make it an activity where you ask interview questions perhaps and get them to answer one at a time. And I know Shanda starts recording her family as soon as they start telling stories. And so that's one way of kind of capturing that. And so really, some folks, this might sound basic, but when you ask better questions, you get better answers. When you ask yes or no questions, it's kind of limited. But when you say, hey, would you tell me what it felt like for you to live through the civil rights movement? Or like, what did you experience when you were in college that can help me with what I'm dealing with now as a new parent? Or what did it, whatever it is, just ask those questions that are more about their experience, and then folks can typically open up. And what you'll realize is both you and the storyteller or the writer, through that process of sharing stories, you'll be learning a lot. You will learn a lot, but it'll almost be like, an accidental lesson, because it'll just come in the way of stories. But stories, as most of you know, are the most powerful form of communication because they're the most engaging and they're the most memorable. We remember stories, and we're all captivated by stories. So when you share that, those are just helpful ways, hopefully, for you to think about actually getting started with maybe one of these family projects to get your history.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off what Brad is talking about, how to, go about doing that. Um, and the first step would be to tell your family member that you want to hear their story. And, as sort of the examples that Brad gave about the similarities, right now there's so many similarities that we have in common, that shared experiences. And if we just talk about them, we can learn from one another and see that there really are. Yes, our parent, Brad's about to be a first time parent. What can he learn from his parents, what they went through, raising him? And the similar with those who may have been active in protests during their, their lifetime earlier. What can they teach us now, or what did they learn? The difference, someone mentioned about their grandparent being a Holocaust survivor, having going through World War I, and what that had impact, how that's made that person more sympathetic to immigrants. There are a lot of shared stories that we have, and if we just talk about them, we can really cross some bridges together for the better. So I would suggest tell your family member and mentors you want to hear their story. I would definitely start with somebody that you feel comfortable with, and especially if it's your first time, so that that'll help build your confidence. And also that person, if you already have an established relationship, they will feel more comfortable in sharing their story with you. And then another thing that I would say is then you decide on a path. What is your mode of communication that you're comfortable with? Do you prefer talking on the phone? Is Zoom okay for you? Or would you prefer just sending a list of email questions and having them respond? So find that out, and then also ask the storyteller or your interviewee what is comfortable for them too. And based off of that, you can decide on a medium, and then availability. How much time do they have to dedicate towards this project? Their schedules, your schedule, and being mindful of that. And then you can schedule weekly calls, emails, depending on that. And it's important. Time is of the essence, and what better way than to start today, right,
Yeah,
Brad?
it's so true. This is one of those projects you've probably seen the grid before of things where it's a quadrant and it's either important and urgent, or an important but not urgent, not important but urgent, not important and not urgent. Have you all seen that before? So this is one of those things that people would typically agree is important. But sometimes the really important work gets a back seat to things that are more pressing right now, or maybe easier to do right now. We choose like the low-hanging fruit instead of like this really important thing. But we wanted to put this third point in there to give you a strong nudge, to give you a strong friendly encouragement that there is no time like now. Don't regret. If you've got an older parent or grandparent, don't regret just having not done this with them, to have some form of their life story. And again, I'm going to advocate in a minute for the written word, but I also know there are other powerful mediums as well. But I was speaking with the marketing director of an assisted living facility the other day, and she said family members are calling their facility uh, constantly these days because of COVID-19, saying, how do I get to my loved one? I know they're feeling isolated. I know they're feeling alone. How do I help them? We're running out of things to talk about. They might call and say, hey, what did you have for lunch today? Or have you watched Wheel of Fortune lately? It's like, all right, what do we talk about next? Well, this could be a project that you could actually start doing now that would immediately help the dynamic involved with working with older parents or older grandparents in your life. So we would just encourage you to create a sense of urgency. Let's do this project by your birthday coming up, or let's do this by the holidays, or by your anniversary. Let's get this family story told, so that we can make sure it's preserved and processed. And you're going to enjoy that whole process. We got a grandson who calls his 92-year-old grandmother every week for a phone date and asks her another interview question using our service. And he just called me to let me know how special those conversations have been. And they actually just finished their project and have published these books that they're going to now have for generations to come. So it can be a beautiful project. You kind of have to start with that vision and then create a sense of urgency. So now we'll chat about some of those benefits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, Brad has definitely touched on preserving written reflections and what that means and the benefits of that just now with even solidifying relationships, strengthening relationships, and what the impact it has on so many different lanes, the writer, the interviewer, and the future readers of it. And for instance, his book, his grandfather wrote, he can now share that with his wife, share that with his child that is, to be born, and future generations, because it's been written down. And that written word is really powerful to hear in his own words, his story. And so that's a benefit of being able to have that, and also being able to sort of, I would say, like, control the narrative a bit, because you're able to share your reflections. Someone else isn't sharing them for you on your behalf, and saying how they remember you being, or remember. So it's a benefit. And I would say that might be a point as well to sort of suggest to someone who's a bit hesitant. And also, I know that we've focused a lot on older adults, but you're never too young to share your story. I just shared a little bit about my story, but there are, like, you can ask a friend, just even if you're just interested in talking to a friend, a mentor, reconnecting with a classmate from William and Mary that you just fell out of touch with, but you'd love to just talk, like, what brought you to William and Mary? Like, what was your shared experience? And from there, even just rolling into a whole other conversation. So there are a lot of benefits to it. So yeah, strengthening relationships, mindful listening. I would highly recommend from class of 1980, Amy Steinler actually had a webinar on mindful listening, and not just active listening, but being mindful. So when you're asking these questions and interviewing somebody, while you ask that question, instead of thinking about your next question in your list of questions, listen, be present in that moment to what they're telling you. And you'd be surprised how the conversation will move. And through that mindful listening is such a good soft skill. It's something that you can apply to different areas of your life. And as we know, emotional intelligence is very important right now, and moving forward in your profession and your personal life. So there are added benefits. And then your interviewing skills, being able to ask questions. Like I said, if you're mindfully listening, you can, even though you have a cheat sheet of where you'd like to go, you can always segue off that and then come back to those questions that you already have set. And you get to learn a lot about a family member or a friend, mentor that you just didn't know. So that's another benefit of that. And then the last one that we had written down is, understanding. Understanding and expanding your perception of yourself and others by sharing these stories. I know a lot of people, podcasts have just blown up over the past years. Like, everyone we listen to them in the car, and we're hearing stories all of the time. And that is another medium, audio, being able to share. Right now we're recording this, and it'll be live, and we'll be able to share that and say, hey, look, when I was younger, I did this webinar and blah, blah, blah. But still, that's a way of preservation. And you get to understand and get awareness, understand, like Brad's story, for instance. I can say a shared interest or something, expand understanding about him, that he was an Army brat. I moved around a lot as well. After, I went to high school in Ivory Coast, and I moved around to London and Tunisia, and I've lived in different places because of my job and because of my family. So that's a shared experience that we now have. And it's just, there's so many opportunities like that just by having a conversation, really getting to understand someone. So there are just a lot of benefits. And as you learn those skills, we can make a difference in our social circles and then the world. It starts with one. And this is a great starting point, just by learning your history and understanding others.
Yeah, I'd love to just quickly share, if you're hesitating, if you're one of those folks maybe that's lived a really full life, or you've experienced a lot in your life, and you've got children or grandchildren right now, and you're picturing whether or not they would appreciate what you might have to write or what you might have to say about your life, and you think, well, they probably wouldn't want to read that, or they wouldn't want to know. I would challenge you on that and say that even if they don't right now, even if they don't at the time fully appreciate. I was 17 years old when my grandfather gave his book to me for Christmas in 1997. He was gone 2 years later. He died of cancer in 1999. And when I got the book in 97, I thought, oh, cool, good job. That's really neat. But it wasn't until 20 years later, when I had gotten married and was starting to think about where I was in my career and where I wanted to be and who I wanted to be, that I reread. I went to the bookshelf and I grabbed his book off the shelf and I reread stories about, his confidence and his willingness to take risks and his, the impact that he felt he had made. And I thought, I want to be like that. That's my blood. And I want to be like that. And so that gave me the confidence to move and to take that risk. So even if you feel like right now maybe there's not a full appreciation, just imagine if you had the words of a great grandparent that you could access and that might inspire some part of your own life. So we want to encourage you all on that. And so we've got a pretty decent amount of time for questions. It's now 12:43, and we'd love to hear any questions that you have about anything we've shared so far, or if you're interested at all in what we're doing with our Legacy Kept project. I can show you, we have a sample of like one of the hardcover books that we print out for people as they finish their project, and you can make as many copies as you want. And so if you would be interested in kind of talking to us some more, the one request that I have, and I'll share this at the very, very end again, would be, we understand that this is a beautiful network of really, really talented and smart and capable people that we're blessed to be a part of, privileged to be a part of. And we'd love your help. We'd love your help. Shanda and I are working together on this project. And if you would be willing to connect us with anybody else who does similar work, or maybe they run an assisted living facility, or they run a, an in-home care, would you please reach out to us? Our email addresses are here on this slide. And so we'd love to be able to hear from you. And also, if you want to do this project, we've got this code WM10 that you could use at legacykept.com and take 10% off. And it's only a $50 account. So it's not like, some people think, oh man, that's probably got to be hundreds of dollars, but it's just 50. And so wanted to share that. And let's have Tim open up with a few of the questions that you've had.
Great. Well, thank you again, Brad and Shanda, for that. That was just fantastic. And of course, as we all are in this pandemic situation right now, I think it's pretty relevant for a lot of us right now. So we do have a question here from Karen, and you had touched a little bit on this, but I'd love to hear more. So how would you suggest storing your stories, either written or recorded, and how can you make those available to other members of your family?
Okay, I can share about the recordings. So it's pretty easy to record. You can actually use, what I've used is GarageBand, as if you would like to edit your stories, or the recordings you can record on your phone using your iPhone. Although if you would like to really get a sharper sound, I would suggest investing in a microphone that you can use. And with the recording, storing it, you can store it on your iCloud if you'd like. You can also share sound bites of it. You can upload it and start your own podcast. That could be a means of doing that when it comes to audio. Yeah, so those are some of the options that I would suggest.
Yeah, and Zoom, I mean, and other probably platforms too for video, you can record meetings. You could record a video call that you might have with a loved one where you ask, from a set of interview questions, ask a question, and then you would have that exchange recorded and saved as well. I know from the writing standpoint, what my father-in-law, who's a software programmer, had in mind was to create a very simple platform that's just a question with a text box that can be either entered through the writer themselves or from a partner, from a family member who asks the question. And that's how the grandson and grandmother did it recently, where he would call on the phone and then type in as she talked, and then that turned into their book. So we try to make it very user-friendly, very simple platform of question prompts so that you don't have to come up with them yourself, but you can certainly add more and you can change them if you'd like. So there's some good tools out there, whether it's a written project or video or audio.
Mm.
And related to that, and I know, Brad, you have some of these resources with Legacy Kept, but do you have any recommended resources on questions to ask? I know we had talked about kind of asking those better questions to get the better responses. So, what kind of resources can you provide to folks looking for those?
Yeah, well, I mean, my answer is going to be get on Legacy Kept, and they're all right there for you. So we've got 30 question prompts that are organized into 5 different categories throughout life, and you can kind of pick and choose the categories you feel like talking about or that you want to answer, from early life to adulthood, career, if there's a faith and values section you want to do. Some people are even adding recipes that they want to add, but some of the basic questions might be to get people's wheels turning a little bit. Like what did you used to do for fun when you were a kid? Ask something like that, and then their answers might prompt additional questions. And that's another good tip, is that, if you use Legacy Kept, you might ask the question, they might give you a 1-sentence answer, but doing this as a family, and Shanda, you probably experienced this when your family gets going on their stories, one story might prompt another, or might actually prompt another question that you have, that you're like, hey, wait a second, you just said this, say
Right.
more,
Yeah, that's what I would suggest too. When I started recording, I wasn't really sure where to start with the questions, and it was just that it was really just okay. What would I like to ask? And it started with a conversation with a 90-year-old family member who traveled around the world as a biologist, and so I was interested in her experience at that time doing that, and that was how the conversation began. And so from there, I was able to, we were able to sort of evolve into, why did you do that? Why did you choose science? How did you feel being a working mother traveling with 2 infants at that time, like 90 years ago? It's very different from now, and about 90, but like I would say 70 years ago. So I would just say, like, if you have an idea of what area of their life you'd like to focus on, that's a great starting point. And then you can, ask those questions. Like, and Brad said he has already a list of interview questions that through Legacy Kept, that would be a good resource. But as well, like if you just want to focus on a specific area of their life and go from there, it's pretty straightforward. You'd be surprised how the conversation flows. When you just ask a question, people are really willing to share their stories. It's just they may be a bit apprehensive at first, but once they know that you're present and you're willing and you're coming from a genuine place, they will open up and share with you.
Yeah.
And we have another question here. We've been talking a lot about asking about family stories, but thinking about maybe neighborhood stories or community stories from families or groups of people who have lived kind of in a similar place or have a similar shared lived experience. Do you have experience doing that? And if so, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was so thrilled when I found out that there's a professor at Berry College in Rome, Georgia, and I'm sure there are others that I just haven't heard of yet. But he has his class of college students go to a local senior center every year and interview some of the seniors individually, and then they turn that interview into a book that gets given to the family as well as kept in the senior center. So there's some really creative ways, and I love that question because it's so important for our localities, our local communities to preserve and at least know about our own histories too. So we are trying to develop partnerships with universities around the country, and we actually this summer have 25 college students working with us from all around the country doing a remote internship to pursue some of those types of partnerships, because we could see it as maybe a high school student interviews his own family member, but they could also interview someone that's a notable person in the community, or someone who may not have another person to interview them, but whose family or whose story is just as important. So that's a great question.
We have another story here, quote unquote, reverse storytelling, where someone from a younger generation is telling their story to someone of an older generation. Have you seen that, and have you seen benefits with that kind of process too?
Shanda, I don't know. I don't want to jump ahead of you. Did you have a quick thought on that?
Oh, sorry. I was sharing with the group a list of the webinars, the link for that for those who are interested in the mindful listening webinar. If you scroll through the list that I just sent to all attendees, you should be able to find that. So the question you said was about, can you just repeat it so that I
Are
can?
younger people sharing their story with older adults?
Oh, yes, I would say so. Because it's you're having a conversation as well, and it's good to, for instance, I can share my experiences with having interviewing in these recordings. Is that in sharing or understanding, for instance, I mentioned about the working mother who 70 years ago, and that is something now. Like, what is the work-life balance? How was that a few, 70 years ago, or what does it mean? What did it mean for you and your family traveling all those places? And that was relevant to my life and what my experiences are. So through that conversation, I was also able to share as well about my interests and areas that I would like to, talk about. So I think it definitely can be a learning experience, a shared learning experience, where they would also like to understand, well, what is it about this young person that they want to learn about these stories? Might consider you an old soul, or this person's actually pretty wise that they want to learn this at this point in their lives instead of waiting much later. So yeah, it can be a two-way street, and you can share those questions as well. If they would like to interview, you can share those questions with them as well, and they can do that. It's a great way of strengthening relationships.
Totally. So I'm writing my own legacy kept book right now about life. I know I have a long way to, God willing, have a long way to go, but as I've been writing my story, I've shared some excerpts of it with my parents, and the other day I was writing a memory came about, like whenever my mom would go to the commissary on like a Saturday morning in the springtime when I was a kid. We lived at Fort Knox. Um, every once in a while, my sister and I would hear Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons start blasting from the living room. And we would run in there, and my dad would be dancing around to Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. And we were like, it's on, like, let's dance. And so we would have these great moments. And I wrote about that story. And then I read it to my dad and my mom. And we were laughing together. And I just wrote about how much I appreciated those moments. And so I think it's in the sharing of my own story when I share it with them that they are like, wow, he remembered that, he appreciated that. And so there have been several similar moments where, and a lot through tears, where I'll just recognize through my own writing, like, wow, my dad coached my teams and I haven't really thanked him as much for that. And so I'll thank him. And so these are ways to strengthen family relationships now as well as in the future. So hopefully that helps too.
Great. And someone else asks, how do you handle when you get the response, I don't remember, or someone who might kind of shut down the question immediately? Is there a way to kind of reframe it to get an answer from them?
Yes, I would like to answer that, and Brad can definitely piggyback. I had that experience with one of my family members that I was interviewing, who I asked about a very traumatic time in her life, and the question I asked was, when did you forgive that person for the whatever they did? And she asked me again, what do you mean? Like she said it a few times, and I realized after the third time of me asking the same question that there was a boundary there. And so I think you'd be sensitive, like in that I learned to be sensitive and mindful. Yes, sometimes we would like to learn about sensitive areas, but also just be sensitive to the person if they are willing to share that. If they say they don't remember, maybe come back to it later, because also sometimes they can later on after the interview, a lot of times people may reflect on the conversation they had with you, and then all of a sudden, oh, I remember that, and they can come back and share that with you. So just have grace with them, and if someone says I don't know, that they may come back, and also be aware of their body language or their tone if there is something that they're a bit hesitant and they aren't ready to share. Allow them, let them, respect them, and their choice to not share that at this time.
Yeah, that's great.
Great. Well, I think to be respectful of everyone's time, we're coming up at the 1 o'clock hour here. So Brad and Shanda, do you have any final remarks or closing comments that you'd like to make?
I would just like to thank everyone for joining and taking the time. The fact that you're here definitely shows that you do have an interest in intergenerational storytelling and that you are a storyteller. We all have stories to share, and your story matters, and those in your family matter. So I really encourage you to do this, to start. Just start. If you have any questions about audio recordings, how listening, or just any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me about that. I'd love to share. And thank you again, and go Tribe. Woo woo.
Yeah, absolutely. Grateful for this time, grateful for Shanda and this wonderful idea. And just now I've got a friend that we've worked together through story sharing. So that's really special. And I'd say, yeah, just like Nike, just do it
Yeah.
and get started with this. Let us know how we can help. And likewise, if there's something, an idea you have that might help us as we try to do this work, please do reach out. Use our emails. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and check out Legacy Capped, really, guys. It's really, Brad has done a lot of great work in that. So if you're interested in written, definitely check it out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you both again. This was a great conversation. For all of our attendees, we did record this session as well. So as we mentioned before, this will be available at wmalumni.com, hopefully sometime next week. But thank you both again. And to all of our attendees, thank you for tuning in. And I hope everyone has a great weekend.
Awesome. Thanks. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks.
And ask for a story if you feel like it.